Picture a global psychological epidemic.
Right.
And it strikes almost exclusively among the smartest, most ambitious young minds on the planet.
Yeah, the absolute top tier.
Exactly. We are talking about the brightest students plucked from the most elite institutions in the world. And they are systematically, entirely unconsciously, being trained to fail the moment they are released into the wild.
It's a brutal cycle.
It really is. And it's incredibly predictable. They raise millions of dollars in seed capital. They rent these sleek, glass-walled offices in the south of Market District in San Francisco.
The historic epicenter of the tech boom.
Right, where the aesthetics of success are practically a religion at this point. So they get the office, they hire their smartest friends, they buy the floor-to-ceiling whiteboards, the catered organic lunches, the $1,000 ergonomic standing desks. They meticulously build the perfect facade of a functioning company, and then inevitably, quietly, the entire structure caves in on itself.
It just evaporates.
The money evaporates, the team fractures, the product launches to utter silence. And you have to ask, why does this happen with such staggering consistency?
Well, it's because the very instinct that brought these individuals lifelong academic success is the problem.
Their unparalleled ability to decipher the rules, right?
Exactly. Their ability to game the system is the exact mechanism of their destruction in the real world of innovation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we are not just talking about a few failed mobile apps or, a couple of naive business plans today.
No.
We are looking at a fundamental crisis in how the future is actually built. And more importantly, how the architects of that future are currently being completely misled by the wiring of their own brains.
It's a structural irony, really.
So in this deep dive, we are examining a masterclass lecture by Paul Graham. He's a programmer, writer, and one of the co-founders of Y Combinator. The lecture is titled Before the Startup.
A really seminal piece of advice.
Yeah, and the intellectual mission for us today is to completely deconstruct the mythos of the young, invincible founder. We want to replace it with a reality that is far more terrifying, but also infinitely more actionable.
Which is so necessary, because to understand the true mechanics of startups, and by extension, the bleeding edge of global innovation, you have to begin by completely dismantling your pre-programmed intuitions.
Meaning everything you think you know is wrong.
Essentially, yes. If you are a high achiever listening to this, your instincts right now are actively lying to you.
Wow.
They're calibrated for an environment that no longer exists the moment you decide to build something entirely new.
Graham uses this incredibly vivid analogy to illustrate this cognitive mismatch. He compares starting a company to learning how to ski as an adult.
Which is terrifying for most people.
Right. Think about the physics and the psychology of that for a second. If you have never been on skis and suddenly you're strapped to these slick fiberglass planks hurtling down a steep, icy mountain,
your absolute most primal survival instinct kicks in.
The amygdala fires. Your brain's threat detection system just screams at you to pull away from the danger. You want to lean back. You want to slow down and retreat from the decline.
And that neurological mismatch is the core issue here. Hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution have wired our brains for predictable ancestral environments.
Where leaning back saves you.
Right. If you're walking down a steep hill in the woods and you start slipping, leaning back and lowering your center of gravity away from the slope might literally save your life.
Makes total sense.
But skiing is a synthetic paradigm. It is a modern invention with its own distinct physics. When you lean back on skis, your weight shifts off the front edges.
Which means you lose control.
Completely. The skis slip out from under you, you lose all directional control, and you crash.
Yeah.
To actually gain control, you have to override millions of years of evolutionary survival instincts.
You have to force yourself into the danger.
Yes. You have to physically force your body to lean forward, to plunge your weight down into the steep, terrifying mountain. That is the only physical way the edges of the skis catch the snow and allow you to carve a path.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if our natural evolutionary instincts are completely useless here, how does anyone survive the transition?
It's incredibly difficult. That's why Y Combinator basically acts as business ski instructors.
Right. But if you're telling me that every natural impulse I have is going to steer me into a brick wall, I'm completely paralyzed.
Wait, if navigating a startup strips away all my natural intuition, is it basically like being suddenly dropped into a zero-gravity environment?
That's a great way to put it.
Like an astronaut floating in deep space, where the concepts of up and down no longer exist, and your inner ear just gives up.
That zero-gravity analogy is actually the perfect framework to understand the psychological terror of early-stage innovation. Let's look at what happens to astronauts. They experience something called space adaptation syndrome.
Right, space sickness. Exactly. On Earth, our vestibular system, the otolith organs in our inner ear, relies on the constant downward pull of gravity to tell our brain which way is up.
It's a constant, reliable rubric for physical reality.
Precisely. But when an astronaut enters zero gravity, that rubric disappears. Their eyes tell them they are moving, but their inner ear is completely silent. It's sending no gravitational data.
So the brain just panics.
It literally induces nausea and disorientation because it assumes it has been poisoned. Now, map that onto a straight-A student starting a company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
For 20 years, their gravity has been the grading syllabus, the professor's expectations, the standardized test rubric.
The things that tell them which way is up.
Right. And the moment they enter the free market, that gravity vanishes. They are in an unbounded system.
There's no syllabus for a startup?
None. The market doesn't hand out an A- for effort. The disorientation they feel is the exact business equivalent of space adaptation syndrome.
But if you are in zero gravity and none of your instruments work, you are effectively flying blind. Is Graham suggesting that founders just have to guess?
Wow.
Because throwing darts in a zero-gravity void sounds like a terrible business strategy.
It would be. But this is where Graham introduces a crucial caveat to the zero-gravity state. It is true that you cannot trust your instincts about the mechanics of the startup itself.
The synthetic parts.
Right. The fundraising cycles, the product development loops, the macroeconomic dynamics, those are the synthetic zero-gravity elements where your earthly intuition completely fails. However, Graham draws a hard line.
Which is?
You must absolutely, unequivocally trust your instincts about people.
Because human nature hasn't changed.
Exactly. Your life up to this point has not prepared you for the esoteric mechanics of venture capital term sheets, but it has absolutely prepared you for human interaction.
There's so much data on that.
Decades of subconscious data. Evolution gave us highly specialized neural circuitry for facial recognition, for tone detection, for microexpression analysis.
We're built to read each other.
We are hardwired to detect deceit and misalignment in our tribe. The fatal mistake young founders make is silencing that ancient, highly tuned radar.
Just to impress someone.
Right. They evaluate a potential co-founder or an early-stage investor, and they ignore their gut simply because that person possesses intimidating credentials.
So if I am looking at a resume that says Stanford computer science, ex-Google lead engineer, sold a previous company for $10 million.
A very shiny resume.
Very shiny. But as we are sitting across the table having coffee, my stomach is quietly but persistently telling me, this person is secretly a narcissist who will throw me under the bus the second things get hard.
It happens all the time.
Graham is saying I have to listen to the stomach over the resume.
You have to listen to the stomach. You override your instinct on the business mechanics, but you lean heavily into your instinct on human character.
Because the resume is just part of that zero-gravity synthetic system.
Exactly. The credentials are part of the synthetic system. The narcissistic behavior is part of the primal system. If you fail to separate those two domains, if you let the shiny credentials override your gut feeling about a person's integrity, you invite toxicity into the foundation of the company.
And startups are just too fragile for that.
Far too fragile to survive a toxic foundation, which leads directly into what Graham considers the most dangerous behavioral trap for young entrepreneurs.
A phenomenon that stems directly from prioritizing the aesthetic of success over the reality of it.
Yes.
You are talking about the epidemic of playing house. If you are listening to this right now and you work in the corporate world, or if you are tinkering with a side hustle, you have absolutely seen this happen.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Young founders often go through the elaborate, highly choreographed motions of what they think a startup is supposed to look like.
It's pure performance art.
It is. They rent the premium office space with the exposed brick. They hire a bunch of their college friends and hand out inflated C-suite titles like VP of Strategy or Chief Visionary Officer.
Chief Visionary Officer.
Right. They spend months obsessing over the color palette of their pitch deck. They go to endless networking events with seed investors, those high net worth individuals who write the very first checks to get a company off the ground.
And it feels like work to them.
But it's not. In doing all of this performative work, they completely, willfully neglect the one and only thing that actually matters, making something people genuinely want.
The psychology behind playing house is fascinating, and it's deeply tied to how our brains process reward.
Why do they do it, though?
Well, Why do brilliant engineers waste weeks picking out Herman Miller chairs instead of talking to users? Because mimicking the aesthetic of a successful company gives the brain a premature dopamine hit.
It feels like achievement without actually achieving anything.
Exactly. When you sign a lease for an office or when you order custom letterpress business cards, your brain interprets that as forward momentum. It is a form of cargo cult business.
Cargo cult. Break that down for the listener, because that's a wild concept.
So, during World War II, military forces set up bases on remote Pacific islands. They brought in airstrips, radios, and massive amounts of cargo food, supplies, equipment.
And the indigenous populations observed all this happening.
Right. Then, after the war, the militaries left and the cargo stopped coming. In an attempt to bring the cargo back, some of the islanders built mock airstrips.
Wow.
They carved headphones out of wood. They built life-size replicas of airplanes out of straw and bamboo. They perfectly mimicked the aesthetic of the airstrip, believing that the form would magically summon the function.
So they thought the wooden headphones would make the real planes drop food again.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what founders are doing when they play house. They're building a bamboo airplane.
They think the Herman Miller chair will summon the revenue.
Yes. They think that if they have the whiteboard, the catered lunch, and the LLC paperwork, the revenue will magically land on their runway.
And it doesn't, because the market doesn't care about your bamboo airplane.
Not even a little bit.
But to trace this back to the root, Graham argues that this isn't just a spontaneous moral failing of the founder. It is a profound systemic failure of modern education.
It goes so deep.
They play house because they have been trained their entire lives by every institution they have ever passed through to look for the trick.
They have been conditioned from kindergarten to game the system. Graham uses a highly specific example here. An automata theory exam in college.
This sounds intense.
It is. Automata theory is a branch of theoretical computer science that deals with abstract machines and computational problems. It is incredibly dense, complex stuff. But an elite student doesn't sit down and try to master the deepest philosophical tenets of computation to pass the class.
No, they analyze the syllabus, they look at the professor's past exams.
Exactly.
They realize the professor has a bias toward, say, deterministic finite automata, and they completely ignore the rest of the textbook.
Yeah.
They optimize for the grade, not the truth.
They crack the rubric. They hack the grading curve. Extracurricular activities in high school are treated the exact same way.
So debate team.
Right. A student doesn't join the debate team because they have a burning, intrinsic desire to master classical rhetoric. They join it to tick a specific box for an Ivy League admissions officer.
The entire first 20 years of a high achiever's life is just a masterclass in pleasing gatekeepers.
By providing exactly the specific inputs the system demands.
So what does this all mean? It means you have an entire generation of elite talent that genuinely believes reality operates on a grading rubric.
They think the universe is grading them.
If I just provide the right aesthetic input, the universe will hand me an A. And you can almost feel the sheer existential terror these founders must experience when they suddenly realize their primary weapon, their elite ability to game the system, is completely useless.
What's fascinating here is how Graham contrasts the artificial environment of school with the brutal reality of the free market.
He brings in the shark analogy, right?
Yes, the user is a shark. Sharks are ancient, primal, evolutionary machines. They have been refining their sensory apparatus for 400 million years. They are entirely outcome-driven.
They aren't looking at syllabi.
No, you cannot wave a red flag at a shark to distract it from a lack of food. You cannot present a shark with a beautifully formatted pitch deck or a sleek corporate logo.
They literally don't have the capacity to care.
To a shark, the equation is terrifyingly binary. It is simply meat or no meat.
Meat or no meat. Either your product solves my painful problem or it doesn't.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't, I'm not going to use it just because your UI is pretty. The user cannot be manipulated by the things that manipulate an admissions officer.
The danger, however, lies in the intermediary steps. You might be charming enough or credentialed enough to fool an angel investor for a round or two of funding.
Because investors are humans, not sharks.
Right. They can be swayed by the confidence trick of a shiny office and a charismatic founder who speaks the jargon of Silicon Valley fluently. They can be gamed.
But that's a trap.
A huge trap. If a founder does that, they're ultimately just playing a long, expensive confidence trick on themselves. Because you can never, ever fool the end user. The user is the shark.
The market always finds out.
Always. Graham highlights a deep philosophical beauty in this harsh reality. There is finally a domain in the world where faking it guarantees failure.
That is a brutal awakening. It completely dismantles the modern obsession with growth hacking.
Graham addresses growth hacks explicitly. He translates the term directly into a single word: bullshit.
Wow, he really doesn't mince words.
He doesn't. You can optimize your search engine rankings, you can manipulate social media algorithms, you can buy targeted ads. But if the core product is not meat, the shark will swim away.
No amount of marketing can save a product that no one intrinsically wants or needs.
It is the absolute end of the line for the professional test taker.
And that brings up a really heavy, almost dark reality about what choosing this path actually entails. We've talked about how founders trick themselves, but we need to look at what happens when a startup actually starts working.
The success state.
Right, because if you build the meat, the sharks come. And when they come, they demand everything. Startups are an all-consuming void. They take over your entire cognitive capacity.
Your brain is never off.
Never. You are thinking about server loads in the shower. You are analyzing user retention at 3 a.m. You are stressing about payroll at your best friend's wedding.
It's a complete hijacking of your life.
And because of this psychological toll, Graham gives a piece of advice that flies in the face of everything society is currently telling young, ambitious people.
Yes, his advice to his own kids.
He explicitly advises his own children, even his 2-year-old, who apparently currently wants to be a bat, do not start a startup in college.
It is a radical stance, particularly when you analyze the current higher education landscape.
Because colleges love this stuff now.
Oh, they do. Universities today are heavily promoting their entrepreneurship programs. They are building massive incubators on campus, hosting high-stakes pitch competitions, offering degrees in innovation.
But Graham argues they are completely missing the point of both the university and the startup.
The fundamental nature of a startup is so utterly consuming that the moment you truly start one, the moment you have users depending on you, you instantaneously cease to be a student.
You might still technically be enrolled. You might occasionally wander into a lecture hall, but your mind is there. Your cognitive bandwidth has been entirely hijacked by the survival of your company.
The conflict is structural. College is designed to be a broad, multidisciplinary exploration. A startup requires violent, singular focus.
You can't do both well.
You really can't. You cannot run a company that requires 100% of your neural processing power while simultaneously absorbing the nuances of Renaissance history or organic chemistry. One will inevitably destroy the other.
And Graham dives deep into the concept of serendipity to explain what is actually lost when you choose the startup over the college experience.
It's a massive sacrifice.
He looks directly at Mark Zuckerberg. Obviously, Zuckerberg is the ultimate astronomical success story of the college dorm room startup. He is the archetype that every 19-year-old founder is trying to emulate.
The billionaire in the hoodie.
Right. But Graham points out the massive, hidden personal cost of that trajectory. Yes, Zuckerberg is a billionaire. Yes, he flies on massive private jets to foreign countries. He controls one of the most powerful communication platforms in human history.
But he entirely lost the serendipity of his 20s.
Gone.
The 20s are a historically unique, irreplaceable developmental window. In the modern human lifespan, it is the only period specifically designed for low-stakes exploration.
It's the time for wandering.
Exactly. It is the time for traveling cheaply, for sleeping on couches in foreign cities, for plunging deeply into whimsical side projects that have absolutely zero apparent economic payoff.
And people look down on that sometimes.
They do. This period of wandering is not a failure to launch, which is how corporate monoculture often pejoratively labels it. It is an essential phase of psychological and intellectual data gathering.
It's when you build the complex, unpredictable neural connections that later manifest as true innovation. If your head is buried in a cap table at 21, you aren't reading the weird, obscure book that might give you the idea for your next company at 30.
Precisely. When you achieve massive success at 20, the serendipity vanishes instantly. You are logged in. The project no longer belongs to you. The project runs you.
Zuckerberg hasn't had a day of unstructured, low-stakes time in 2 decades.
Every move he makes affects global markets and international politics. That is an immense burden to take on before your prefrontal cortex is even fully developed.
Wait, if starting this thing destroys my 20s, if it completely strips away my freedom, my youth, and my serendipity, and basically hijacks my entire neural network, why on earth wouldn't I just go work for a big tech company, collect a massive salary, and keep my weekends?
It's a very fair question.
If I am an ambitious 20-year-old listening to this, shouldn't I just avoid the startup meat grinder entirely? How do I even know if I have the psychological fortitude to survive it?
This raises an important question, and it is the central paradox of the entrepreneurial journey. The terrifying truth is that you cannot tell if you are capable of surviving it beforehand.
You just can't know.
It is intrinsically impossible to know, no matter how many personality tests you take or how many autobiographies of founders you read.
Why, though? If I've thrived in high-pressure sports, or if I've survived grueling academic regimens, doesn't that prove I have grit?
It proves you have grit in bounded systems. But the startup process fundamentally alters your psychology. You are not the same person at the end of the gauntlet that you were at the beginning.
It changes who you are.
Deeply. A startup forces you to cross uneven ground in a thick fog, making high-stakes, irreversible decisions with severely imperfect information. Your past successes in structured environments provide almost zero predictive value for this specific type of chaotic endurance.
Because the fog is so thick.
The crucible of the free market melts you down and reformats your stress responses. The only way to find out if you have the capacity for it is to actually step into the void and try.
Let's jump in.
But, and this is key, Graham's point isn't to discourage ambition. His point is simply regarding timing. Try it, absolutely. Just do not try it when you are 20 years old. Wait until you have absorbed the serendipity of youth.
Let your brain fully mature.
Gather the data first.
So assuming you've waited, assuming you have gathered your serendipity, you've traveled, you've read widely, you've lived a bit, and now you are ready to step into the arena.
The next phase.
The most obvious question for anyone listening is, where do the actual ideas come from? If I want to build a startup, how do I find the idea? And Graham's answer is, once again, deeply counterintuitive.
It really is.
You get the best startup ideas by explicitly not trying to think of them.
The conscious, strained effort to invent a startup almost universally yields terrible results. When you sit down with a blank whiteboard and say, I'm going to brainstorm a billion-dollar company today, your brain grasps at the most obvious, superficial problems.
Because you're forcing it.
But worse than being terrible, these forced ideas are what Graham categorizes as plausible-sounding ideas.
Plausible sounding, meaning they aren't obviously bad. They sound just logical enough to be dangerous.
Exactly. They are the most dangerous traps in the ecosystem. A completely absurd idea is harmless because you discard it immediately.
Right, you laugh it off.
But a plausible-sounding idea like, say, a social network for pet owners or yet another marginal productivity app sounds just good enough to fool you, to fool your friends, and maybe even to fool a seed investor who isn't paying close attention.
Which means you will inevitably waste 3 to 5 years of your finite life pursuing a mirage.
Because you are forcing a solution to a problem that doesn't organically exist, you are contorting reality to fit your desire to hold the title of founder.
The identity becomes more important than the utility.
Instead of hunting for ideas like a predator hunting prey, Graham argues you must cultivate a brain that generates them unconsciously. It's a process of unconscious genesis.
You have to change the environment of your mind.
The formula he provides for this is deceptively simple, but incredibly hard to execute in a world obsessed with immediate optimization.
What's the formula?
First, learn about things that actually matter. Not things that are trendy, but foundational technologies and complex human problems. Second, work on problems that genuinely interest you, regardless of their commercial viability.
Just purely interest-driven.
Right. And third, work with people you deeply like and respect.
And the historical proof of this formula is just overwhelming. When you look at the titans of the modern era, Apple, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, none of them were supposed to be companies.
They really weren't.
They weren't born out of focus groups or market research. They were side projects. They were hobbies. They were obsessive little puzzles that the founders were tinkering with in their garages or dorm rooms simply because they couldn't help themselves.
It was pure curiosity.
Wozniak just wanted to build a computer for his friends at the Homebrew Computer Club. Page and Brin were just trying to organize library searches at Stanford.
Paul Buchheit, the creator of Gmail, coined the perfect phrase for this psychological state. Living in the future.
I love that phrase.
It's brilliant. When you immerse yourself deeply in complex, cutting-edge problems, when you spend all your time playing with new frameworks or reading obscure research papers, you effectively transport your mind into the future. You normalize the bleeding edge.
And when you live in the future, the things that are missing in the present become blatantly obvious to you.
Even if they seem like magic or science fiction to everyone else around you.
And Graham shares a perfect historical example of this dynamic in action. He talks about a graduate student in the mid-90s.
It's such a great story.
We have to set the scene here. In the 1990s, the internet was primarily text-based. People were using screeching dial-up modems. Telecommunications were dominated by massive corporate monopolies like AT&T. And if you wanted to call someone in another country, you paid exorbitant permanent long-distance charges.
It was highly regulated, circuit-switched infrastructure. Very slow to change.
Right. So this graduate student, who was an expert in computer networks, wrote his own voice-over IP program. He figured out how to turn his voice into data packets and send them over the internet.
But the intention here is the critical part of the story. He didn't do it to revolutionize global telecommunications.
No.
He didn't write a 50-page business plan detailing how he was going to disrupt AT&T and dismantle the long-distance billing model.
No. He wrote the program simply because he wanted to talk to his girlfriend in Taiwan without paying massive phone bills. That's it. It was entirely personal.
To him, because his expertise meant he was already living in the future of network architecture, it was entirely obvious that you should just turn sound into data packets and ship them over the internet for free, exactly like an email.
The infrastructure was there, it just hadn't been applied to voice yet.
He never even tried to turn it into a startup. He was just solving a highly specific personal friction point using his domain expertise.
But that organic, unforced problem-solving, that scratch-your-own-itch mentality is the exact DNA of almost every world-changing company.
The commercialization came later. The utility came first.
Which naturally brings up a fascinating tension regarding formal education and career planning. During the Q&A segment of Graham's lecture, an audience member challenges this exact dynamic.
Yes, the business school question.
Right. Someone essentially asks, what about business school? What about design school? If my ultimate goal is to be a founder, shouldn't I go to an institution that explicitly teaches the mechanics of commerce? Shouldn't I get an MBA?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of macroeconomic history, we have to look at what business schools were actually designed to achieve.
They weren't designed for startups, were they?
They were not designed to create innovators. Historically, starting in the early 20th century, MBA programs were created to train the officer corps of large, established, predictable corporate entities. Think railroads, oil conglomerates, manufacturing monopolies.
Behemoths.
Yes, they teach management, resource allocation, risk mitigation, and optimization within known parameters.
But startups do not operate in known parameters. Startups, by definition, are an expedition into the complete unknown.
Precisely. They are expeditions. Graham points out that studying expertise in startups is essentially like studying linguistics.
Right. If you study linguistics, you understand the theoretical structure of syntax, phonemes, and grammar trees.
You know the mechanics of language.
But knowing the theory of language won't actually help you order a coffee from a frustrated barista in a cafe in Paris. It's too abstract.
The theory does not survive contact with reality. To build a successful startup, you do not need theoretical expertise in the mechanics of startups. You don't need to know how to optimize a supply chain on day one.
So what do you need?
You need hyper-specific, granular expertise in your users. You need to know their pain points better than they do. You only encounter the complex problems of corporate management if your product is so wildly successful that the company explodes in size.
Which is a good problem to have.
And if you reach that point of scale, you have the capital to hire the MBAs to manage the infrastructure for you.
The MBAs work for the explorers.
Yes. The ultimate directive for the future of global innovation, the distillation of Graham's entire philosophy across this entire lecture, comes down to just two words.
Just learn.
Just learn.
It is so stark. It removes all the posturing, all the Soma office aesthetics, all the cargo cult behavior of playing house. It strips away the obsession with pitch decks and networking events.
It demands genuine, relentless curiosity.
And as we start to pull all these intellectual threads together, I think this framework fundamentally changes how you, the listener, should look at your own career path right now. Whether you're actively trying to build a company or just thinking about those weird little side projects you tinker with on the weekends.
It demands a total reevaluation of what we consider to be productive time in our society. The dominant corporate narrative tells us to aggressively strategize every single career move.
We are told to optimize our networking, to build a pristine, linear resume, to attend the right conferences.
But the reality of true innovation suggests that leaning into your esoteric obsessions, the things you do simply because you find them endlessly fascinating, even if they look like a waste of time to your peers, is actually the most strategic, high ROI thing you can do for your future.
And it also reframes how we think about building teams and trust. There is this intense modern fear of monoculture in corporate environments,
The idea that hiring people who are exactly like you creates blind spots.
which is absolutely valid for a massive, established conglomerate that needs diverse inputs to serve a global market. But in the hyper-fast, zero-gravity world of an early-stage startup, Graham points out that the most successful companies often just hire their pals out of college.
Shared culture, deep implicit trust, and the ability to communicate without friction isn't a weakness or nepotism in phase one. It's a critical speed advantage.
When you are hurtling down the mountain on skis, you do not have time to hold a committee meeting about which direction to lean. You need to know implicitly that the person next to you is leaning forward too.
The shared culture acts as a shorthand. When the external environment is entirely uncertain, internal certainty is your only anchor.
It is the ultimate test of human alignment in a synthetic world. And it leaves us with a profound shift in perspective. What if the most revolutionary thing you can do for your future success isn't to aggressively strategize your next career move, but to surrender your ambition to genuine curiosity? If the future belongs to those who live in it unconsciously, ask yourself right now, what are you building today just because you want it to exist tomorrow?